Hello, and welcome to this special presentation as part of the Godzilla and Friends Film Festival. Earlier today, we saw the movie Godzilla vs. Monster Zero. And as part of this presentation, we have two very special guests who have a personal connection to this film. My name is Steve Reifel, and our guests today are Allyson Adams, who is an award-winning playwright and author, performing artist, activist, educator, and also the daughter of Nick Adams. Welcome, Allyson.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
And we have Pat Saperstein. Pat is a highly respected entertainment journalist and an editor for the industry publication Variety. And she is the daughter of Henry G. Saperstein, who was the head of United Productions of America and who co-produced Godzilla vs. Monster Zero with Toho. Welcome, Pat.
Hi, Steve. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of your two dads who worked together on two films, both Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, and prior to that, a film called Frankenstein Conquers the World, which was also made with Toho. And we're going to talk about their careers and the work they did together and look at some really cool images from that time period. Here we go. And so, Allyson, I want to start by asking you about the performance that Nick Adams gave in Godzilla vs. Monster Zero. Being an American actor, a Hollywood veteran, an Academy Award nominated actor, he went to Japan in the mid-'60s and worked in this film that I think a lot of other American actors, Hollywood actors of his stature might have not taken so seriously, but his performance is wonderful and it's dedicated. He's really dedicated to the material. And I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about Nick and where he was at this point in his life and career.
Well, it has been a great joy to relearn about Godzilla and my dad's work in Japan because I was a little girl. I did travel with my dad in 1965 to Tokyo while he was making the movie. So I have really fond memories of Japan. And one of the things that I loved hearing is that he really was a team player. He was very involved with the cast and people. He and Honda became good friends. He was very good friends with his co-stars. So it's been fun to learn more about it and rediscover that he has all these new fans. I think he would be really surprised.
Now, where was he? We should talk a little bit about how he got to this point in his career. We mentioned that he had been nominated for an Academy Award. That was for a film called Twilight of Honor. Here's the poster for that. But can you talk about his career leading up to this point in his life?
Well, some would say in my dad's mind that he, going to Japan and doing B sci-fi films was not his first choice. But he had been nominated for an Academy Award, Twilight of Honor. Unfortunately, he got cut out of the picture after he did this whole big campaign. So we always kind of wonder if he maybe made some people in Hollywood mad and he wasn't working as much. It was also it was a time when he and my mother were going through a pretty contentious divorce. They did get back together to come to Tokyo. So it wasn't a great time in his life as far as Hollywood goes, but he ended up really making the movies that end up becoming cult classics that people are still talking about 60 years later. So it's just ironic, I think.
We should mention that he was in Rebel Without a Cause. He really became, I think, super famous as Johnny Yuma in The Rebel. And we have an image from a comic book. You've made it when they make a comic book out of your character.
And a figurine too.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
A figurine riding a horse. My brother has it, but there's Johnny Yuma, stick toy.
Yeah. And This is Henry Saperstein, Henry G. Saperstein. Pat, do you want to tell us a little about who your dad was and where he was at this point in his career?
Sure. So my dad started out in the, he started out as a very young man helping manage his dad's movie theaters. And excuse me. And then he went into the merchandising business when he lived in Chicago. He did the merchandising for Elvis Presley and for a lot of the early Westerns like Roy Rogers and the Rifleman. He was one of the first people who really sold a lot of toys and other items connected to TV shows and movies because that was just getting off the ground at that time. And then around 1960, he bought the UPA Studios, which was a very well-known animation studio that had been winning Oscars for theatrical shorts for Academy Awards. And they were kind of, having trouble making money at that point. And so he took them into television and started making Mr. Magoo cartoons for television. And then he made also an animated feature, Gay Paris, which you can see the poster from. And then his salespeople from his studio that were selling to TV stations around the country and around the world, they wanted more product to be selling besides just Mr. Magoo cartoons. They also had Dick Tracy cartoons, and they had a character named Gerald McBoing Boing. But they wanted more product to sell. And so that was how he got into the monster movies business with Toho, and also ended up producing a few other films. Like the previous still, you could see him with Lee Marvin, and that was on the set of the film Hell in the Pacific with Toshiro Mifune, the famous Japanese actor, and Lee Marvin. He went out to the island of Palau to shoot that movie with director John Borman.
Yeah, I'm going to actually, you're not supposed to back up on slideshows, but I'm actually going to back up just a second because we have the photo here with Henry and Lee Marvin, and also a shot of Henry with Woody Allen. They worked on What's Up, Tiger Lily together. So Frankenstein Conquers the World is the first film that Nick flew to Japan to make. This is in 1965. It's a story about a new Frankenstein monster that appears in Hiroshima. It's kind of a retelling of the Frankenstein legend where a young boy appears in Hiroshima having been disfigured by the bomb. And Nick plays a scientist kind of based on a lot of real-life American physicians who went to Japan in the 40s and the 50s and beyond that to try to assist the victims of the survivors who were suffering from radiation ailments in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Allyson, what can you tell us about this part of Nick's life and his adventures in Japan?
Well, I was just reading about Honda last night, and one of the quotes that he said is that he always wanted to show scientists from around the world working together to avoid catastrophe. And because the movies were based on the atomic bomb, and so I just thought that was fascinating, especially where the world is today, is how we really need people to work together, in that, Honda was very idealistic that way. But like I said, going to Japan was really one of the highlights of my childhood. I have wonderful memories of seeing Mount Fuji and being in the Toho studio with the miniatures of Godzilla in the Tokyo. We had quite a tumultuous landing when we got to Tokyo. They close all the windows in the hotels. Everything is sealed. And we literally were driving in a taxi cab through Tokyo, stopping at every hotel to see. My dad would run in and see if the windows would open. And then if they didn't, we'd get back in the car. And it wasn't until we got to the Hilton Hotel that they actually had windows that you could open. And then we decided to stay there. And the owner of the Hilton Hotel was a sumo wrestler. I remember the housekeepers taught us origami, and we went to the Buddhist temples. I remember in Japan, everybody smoked, and they wore masks when there was if they had a cold because of the population. And I just remember and loved the culture. And later in my life, I've even studied it more.
I wanted to share this photo. This, I think, ties to something that we were already touching on, which is that Nick, when he was in Japan, he didn't lord over everybody like a big Hollywood star. He really became part of the Toho ensemble and really kind of embraced this whole experience. This is Nick visiting. Normally, the Japanese principal cast members didn't really hang around on the set where the special effects were produced, the monsters and the miniature sets. But this is Nick visiting with Mr. Nakajima, who played Godzilla in many films, and here he's playing the monster that fights the Frankenstein monster. This is a monster called Baragon, which is this quadrupedal kind of prehistoric kind of thing. So it just speaks. I love this photo, and it just speaks to his friendliness and his openness to this whole time in his life.
And my dad often talked about how much he respected him as an actor. And when he was interviewed later on, he kept saying kind of bad things about Russ Tamblyn whenever people would ask him about the American actors he had worked with on these movies. But I think he loved working with Nick. He always said he was a real professional.
I can relate to you that the Japanese cast members and crew members all said very, very similar things. They all loved Nick because of his attitude and his warm embrace of Japan and its culture and the way they work there. They work differently in Japan, and we can talk a little bit about that. But there are other actors like Russ Tamblyn and Rhodes Reason and Joseph Cotton, Cesar Romero. They all went over there to work on productions like this, and in general, the feeling was that Nick was really the best of the bunch. This is Nick and his co-star Kumi Mizuno to his right there, and on the far right, pointing is director Shiro Honda, who worked on Godzilla and many of the sequels, and did the two films with Nick. Do we want to address Allyson, the rumors that persisted for a number of years about Nick and his possible involvement with Kumi Mizuno? There were certainly among fans of these films, the rumor that maybe that they had been somehow involved during the production. I think that's mostly been set to rest, though.
Well, I think my father follows in the footsteps of many actors, that he always sort of fell in love with his leading lady, and he did, and I think he did fall for Kumi. And I was reading how their scenes were actually kind of racy for the time. There was a mention, and of course, because my parents were going through a divorce, my mother said that they had an affair. So I grew up thinking that. Then I opened my big mouth and I said that. And then it was, she was very offended, Kumi, because I guess my dad was calling her every night and proposing, and she didn't even speak English. So she didn't even really know what he was saying. But I really think it was a rumor, and of course I apologize for speaking out of school many years ago, but they definitely had a chemistry, and she is so gorgeous, and I just love her. So,
well, we can see where the rumor might have come from. They did the two films together, the two monster films. In the second film, Godzilla versus Monster Zero, they have great chemistry, and she plays this sort of femme fatale character who initially sort of seduces him for other purposes, but then she really falls for him, and they just have some wonderful moments together on screen, which, as you say, they normally don't see in a film like this. Here's another scene from the set of Frankenstein Conquers the World. And I love this shot. This is on location with Honda and Nick, who, again, became pretty good friends. And Nick came over to Honda's house for dinner on more than one occasion. One of the stories I really liked was that I guess Nick took a liking to Honda's son, Ryuji, who would have been about high school age at the time. And there was even talk of Ryuji coming over to stay with Nick in the United States, although that never happened. But there was apparently a letter sent by Nick to Honda's family inviting Ryuji. And this is a set or a behind the scenes photo, again, showing this, I guess, shows Nick's stature as a leading man, but it also shows him, being really interested in taking part in this process. The three gentlemen that he's sitting here with are royalty at Toho. To his immediate right is Tomoyuki Tanaka, the producer of the first and many of the Godzilla films and many other important Japanese films at Toho. To the right of Tanaka is Ishiro Honda, and to the right of Honda is Eiji Tsuburaya, who was kind of like the he was the special effects wizard, the artist who created all of these wonderful illusions. And now we're getting to Monster Zero. Pat, can you talk about? I know you said you didn't have an opportunity to go to Japan with Henry, but you worked in his company, and I'm sure you must have had some opportunity to discuss some of these films with him over time. I'm just curious to know what your impressions were of his attitude toward these movies and his work that he had done with Toho.
Well, I think he had a real affection for Godzilla that he developed. I mean, at his heart, he was a businessman. He wasn't necessarily the creative vision behind any of this, but he was a businessman, but one who developed a real affection for the character and was very protective of Godzilla as a character and as a property. And, from acquiring the rights to the original first movie, and distributing that around the country, to going to Japan to work on Monster Zero and War of the Gargantuas. He just really appreciated the Japanese culture and really liked any say that he could have about the way the character was developed or the way the movies were made. He enjoyed sharing a few opinions on how they were made, or giving, I think he thought he was giving the Japanese some tips on what might appeal to Americans. And then he always was just very attuned to anything involving Godzilla for the whole entirety of his life. When I worked with him, we spent quite a bit of time just protecting the copyright of Godzilla. We had a court case where we sued Sears, or Toho sued Sears, for making some trash bags that were called Bagzilla. And we, anytime someone was trying to slap a Godzilla picture on the front of a toy or a garment or anything, we would send them a very strict letter and tell them that they couldn't do that with Godzilla. And so he was a very good steward of the character, I think, on behalf of the Japanese owners.
I got the impression that he really liked Godzilla authentically. I had the opportunity to interview Henry 2 times in the 1990s when I was first starting to get interested in researching these movies. He had an office at the time in, I think, Sherman Oaks, or the Valley, at the San Fernando Valley. And I remember a couple of things that, oh, by the way, he really played the part of the mogul. During one of our interviews, he smoked a big fat cigar for the entirety of the interview, I think. And it was really wonderful. But he was so friendly, and he would answer the phone when you'd call him, things like that, which a normal studio head wouldn't do. But he told me that he went to Toho when he saw the first Godzilla movie, and Godzilla was trashing everything. He went and recommended that they turn Godzilla into a hero. So he took a little credit for the change in the personality of the monster, and and he also seemed to really ingratiate himself in Japanese culture. He told me about taking, before he prepared to go meet with them, studying Japanese language at, I think it was at LA City College or maybe an extension course of some kind. So he really took all of this very, very seriously. As you say, he was a businessman, but he seemed to have a genuine love for this content.
He did. I think he really liked, being involved with someone in another country like that and getting to bring what they did to America and share it with Americans. And I don't remember him going taking the class and all of that, but it's certainly possible. He was always giving me little tips on Japanese culture, like you have to always have lots of business cards with you and be prepared to pass out business cards everywhere you go, and just little tips like that, and a few words here and there that he had picked up. So I think he did really enjoy it.
Here's something interesting about these movies, and I think this picture we're looking at really kind of speaks to this. And this is like the ingenuity of both, I think, Henry Saperstein and Nick Adams and Toho working together. They came up with a system where they used a bilingual script. Nick didn't really, he didn't speak Japanese, and Kumi Mizuno and the Japanese cast didn't speak English, and they filmed their scenes together in two languages. Nick would speak English, the other cast members spoke Japanese, and I guess they had to remember the timing and the emotion of how to play off each other. And then when the film was brought to America, the Japanese actors would be dubbed into English, and Nick would be dubbed into Japanese in Japan. Can you, imagine working that way? It seems really unusual, and yet it's genius.
I have a friend who was a cinematographer in the business for years, and he said Fellini never had dialogue. He just used to tell the actors to count, and then he would dub them in later. So I don't know. I read something about Nick and his actors. They were playing jokes on each other, and Nick asked to learn how to say good morning, and they told him, "I'm hungry."
Right.
And so he was saying, "I'm hungry," and then he got the other actor back by speaking in Japanese to him, saying, "You're overacting." So they were playing jokes on each other.
Yeah, they I don't know if we have a picture of Mr. Tsuchiya, Yoshio Tsuchiya, who was a great actor in Kurosawa films and other films at Toho over the years. But he and Nick became really good friends. Tsuchiya played the villain in the film, the alien leader, and he was talking about in our interviews about all the times they would joke around with each other and, like you say, play tricks on one another. Here's Henry on the right, shaking hands with Honda, and that's producer Tanaka to the left. One of the stories I remember also that Henry told was that I was going to ask, how did he come up with this idea to actually approach Toho and make these movies or co-produce these movies? When UPA started venturing into the feature film business, Henry somehow got the idea that he should get into science fiction films, even though the science fiction film craze really kind of was a thing of the 1950s, and by the early 60s it was kind of fading. But he told a story about how he went to the Margaret Herrick Library of the Academy of Motion Pictures, and Margaret Herrick, the librarian there, told him to go to Toho in Japan and go to Hammer in the United Kingdom, and he ended up going to Toho, approaching Toho, and venturing into this partnership with them, which lasted several years. I think that really took some open-mindedness and some guts.
It is interesting, and I think that even though the main sci-fi craze might have been a little bit over by then, television was still new enough that they just needed so much product to show. You know, some of these TV stations were going all night long and playing movies all night long, and there just wasn't a big enough supply of any kind of movies, and especially ones that would appeal to a broad TV audience and be able to be shown to the whole family. So I think he just, was looking for things that TV stations could buy to fill in their schedule whenever it was. And sci-fi movies seemed like they might, that might be a good thing for them to show.
Pat, do you happen to know about Henry's business relationship with American International Pictures and/or Sam Markoff? Some of the early films, the first two films that he worked on with Toho were distributed through AIP, I believe. But,
right, I believe AIP was the theatrical distributor because UPA didn't really distribute directly to theaters, so they had to go through a theatrical distributor, and that's what AIP did for them. And then, but then UPA also had a catalog of AIP films that they sold for television and whatever other rights, like college campuses and so forth. So it was kind of a reciprocal relationship. I think AIP distributed for them in theaters and UPA distributed for AIP to television. And so we had a whole catalog of sci-fi and all kinds of, very kitschy AIP movies that we sold for college showings. In those days, every college had a film society and would rent 16 millimeter films. And so we would do that with AIP films.
Just briefly, I want to mention another film, War of the Gargantuas, which is another cult classic from Toho and from UPA. This is a behind-the-scenes shot of the filming of a very famous scene that's actually been parodied in movies, and Devo covered the song. The words get stuck in my throat. Excuse me. There's actually a Scooby-Doo cartoon that parodies this scene. Where Kip Hamilton, an American actress who came to Japan just to appear in this one scene. She had appeared in a lot of American television. She plays the nightclub singer who is snatched off the rooftop stage by the green gargantua, who attempts to eat her, but the people shine lights in the monster's face and he drops her. And so you see in this scene, director Honda is actually showing the actress how to lay on the ground as if she's been dropped from a certain height. It's a great movie. It's something I grew up watching again and again and again on local television, because in those days they would play movies over and over again. Pat, can you talk about, do you know anything about Kip Hamilton? Because not to go back to the rumor mill, but when we were researching these films, the Japanese crew members would tell us that Henry brought her to Japan to appear in this scene, specifically because she was his girlfriend, and he wanted to put his girlfriend in the film, which is not out of bounds, but it's just it was an interesting story.
No, I still haven't found out anything about her. I had never heard her name mentioned at all until you asked me about it last time, and I meant to check with my sisters. But I feel like they would have told me also if they had heard anything about it. No, I think if it's certainly possible, because my parents were also going through a divorce at that time, probably at the exact same time as Allyson's parents. So it's certainly possible that, there was someone who precipitated that, or that he was, there was something going on the down low, but I never heard that name. I always had a great affection for War of the Gargantuas. I think it's one of my favorites of all of my dad's movies. I think it's a really fun movie, but I don't know anything about that because I was very young and they kept me away from all of that. But my mom did end up writing a book called How to Tell If Your Husband is Cheating on You.
Oh.
So that seems like kind of a little bit of a clue right there. But not sure who it was referring to. It was kind of a joke book full of one-liners, but it was definitely based on some kind of reality.
Oh, I have to get that. That's great.
It was in retrospect, it's very cute, but it was probably, born out of some frustration at the time.
Yeah, Hollywood is tough on relationships, obviously. Pat, do you have sisters? Do you have any brothers?
I have an older brother, but he was already out of the house by the time my dad was making this movie. So, but my older sisters, might remember more about that period when he was traveling back and forth to Japan all the time. So I'll have to talk to them about it. I do remember when he went to film Hell in the Pacific. When he was calling from Palau and the phone connection was terrible, and it, he tried to call us and it was very staticky, and he was like, I'm on this little island in the South Seas and the phones don't work and the toilets don't work and everything. So I do remember when he was over there, but that was maybe 67 or so.
I'm curious because how did you become the keeper of the flame for your dad and Godzilla? Because you have other siblings, but you're the one that's carrying the torch. So
that's true. I don't know how that happened. I think maybe just because I'm an entertainment journalist, it just came more naturally. And but I'm sure my older sister would also be happy to talk about it at some time, but she was also already out of the house. So I was the only one still living there. And then I also did, work at UPA later on when I was in my 20s.
So Pat, let's talk a little, just briefly. This is the poster for What's Up, Tiger Lily. You mentioned Hell in the Pacific, which is a really interesting movie with Lee Marvin and the great Toshiro Mifune as American and Japanese soldiers kind of waylaid together, marooned on an island. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how his relationship with Toho evolved over the years after the 60s?
So he was, involved with productions such as War of the Gargantuas and Monster Zero, and then after that, in the 70s, he didn't really want to be involved with production anymore. I think he thought it was risky. It involved risking more of your money than just distributing things, and every production he got involved with was pretty much troubled, I think. Like probably War of the Gargantuas and Godzilla versus Monster Zero did okay in theaters. But What's Up, Tiger Lily, he ended up being sued by Woody Allen, I think, for a share of the profits. And Hell in the Pacific really tanked in movie theaters, even though it's a very interesting production. And John Boorman is a very respected director, but it just didn't catch on. And so pretty much everything he was involved with was very troubled. And he just got cold feet as far as doing productions after that. And Gay Paris also had a lot of problems, even though it's a very interesting, fun animated movie. So he just decided to concentrate on distribution and merchandising after the 70s. And so he continued his relationship with Toho, I believe right up until the time he died in 1998. He was still, distributing films to television and video cassettes, and I think maybe even DVDs in the end. And then also merchandising the toys and making deals for all kinds of fun Godzilla items, from cigarette lighters to the giant inflatable Godzillas to everything else. So he kept up his relationship with Toho for quite a long time.
I had one of the cigarette lighters back in the days when I used to smoke. I think it was in the 80s. Yeah, that was really cool.
I still have mine.
Oh, I love one.
They're very cute.
They're very good. I just wanted to mention briefly that Saperstein was also involved with a film called Godzilla's Revenge, which was originally titled Minya, and he also brought over the terror of Mechagodzilla, which was Honda's last film.
Not a good poster. Not
Sorry?
really. I don't. That's not really a great poster.
No, but in those days they were kind of cut and pasting things. It was pre-Photoshop. Yeah. Now, Allyson, Nick made a third film at Toho. This is a frame grab from a film called The Killing Bottle, which I believe he was involved with also as a producer in some form or fashion. Do you know anything about this film? It was lost for many years. It's turned up, I think, recently in sort of the digital underground. But it's a film that sort of disappeared after it was released in Japan and never showed up on video.
I don't know about this movie. I've never seen it. I have the poster that somebody sent me, which is really cool. But I really don't. But all I know is that my dad, he was like any actor. They just want to work. They just want to work. And that, that whether he had to go to Japan or he had to go to Rome or Mexico, he didn't care. And I think it's very similar. A lot of actors, whether they go to Italy or Spain or wherever they can work, because Hollywood's tough and people go in and out of fashion. You're up, you're down. And he was determined. He was not going to give up. And, and I'd love to learn more about Honda's son. Is he still alive? And is he a filmmaker? And I'd love to talk to him. What's his name?
Ryuji. He was instrumental in helping us write his father's biography several years ago. And yes, he's a documentary filmmaker, and he actually worked in the United States for the Japanese network NHK for many years. He lived in the New York area, and he's in Japan now. And let's talk about that offline.
Okay.
Yeah. And Nick was also a writer. I definitely wanted to recommend this book, The Rebel and the King, which how many years ago was this published? It's fairly recent, wasn't it?
Well, the first edition was 2012, and then I've published an expanded edition that has a gold and sign, and I added a wonderful essay by Elaine Dundee, who wrote the book Gladys about Elvis's mother. And she wrote an essay about Elvis as sort of an ugly duckling story. It's really wonderful. And then Roy Turner, who's a documentarian, wrote an essay. And, one of the things I learned when I published the book, so many people came forward. I learned heard so many great stories about my dad, and the book, it just ended up being its own journey. There's going to be a new movie coming out with Tom Hanks playing Colonel Parker, a musical, and that'll be interesting to see. But yeah,
are they going to show? Is there going to be a part that shows your dad, do you think?
No, I think they're doing it more in the 70s. It's interesting because I was contacted by somebody from Tom Hanks' production company, Playtone, in 2012 when the book first came out. And I think Tom Hanks been wanting to play Colonel Parker for a while, but they didn't. I'm not involved in this movie at all, but they did approach me when the book came out. It's a fun story. I just did a podcast. I'm going to be doing more. It's really funny how I think they're trying to keep the Elvis image alive with the new audience. So
I want to just mention the fact that Nick was a writer. When I was researching him and his work on these movies some years ago, I was really pleased to discover an article that he wrote that was published in the Herald Examiner newspaper in Los Angeles in 1965 when he was working on, or had just completed working on, Frankenstein Conquers the World. And I believe the title, I'm paraphrasing, was In Defense of Those Japanese Monster Movies, because at that time period, these films were, ridiculed, and they would, if they were written about in the review columns at all, they were usually made fun of. And Nick had high praise for them. He praised his fellow cast members, and he just loved the whole experience. It's a wonderful article, and you, Allyson, had discovered, I believe, a lot of writings that your dad had done. Can you talk about your work, just kind of in your own research into his life and career and the things you've discovered?
I discovered the manuscript in a box of his memorabilia that I didn't even know existed. He seemed to like that title, I Defend, because the book is based on an article that he wrote, I Defend Elvis. So he was defending the Japanese, he was defending James Dean. I always wonder, well, who defended him? Because I guess it's me. But he wrote in a lot of the fan magazines. He wrote Natalie, he and Natalie Wood. Natalie's daughter just put out a book, More Than Love. And she mentions my dad at the end of the book, saying she found a journal that my father had given Natalie and found her writings, and actually found the most intimate, personal writings in that journal. And this, nobody ever mentions this, but my dad actually introduced Natalie Wood to RJ Wagner, and was at their wedding. And I recently got a picture of them. What did I do with it? Of them at the wedding, cutting the cake. So he was always writing articles back then. And I just found out, I didn't know, that Dennis Hopper, Natalie Wood, and my dad were in Life magazine, and thought that was pretty cool. So it's been a journey. As a child, I just really never knew my dad was friends with all these huge stars of that time. So it's been fun. I always think he's kind of like the fifth Beatle. He's like the guy that you don't ever see him in the picture till you see the original. And my dad's on the end, but he's cut out. You can't believe how many pictures are out there where my dad's there, but cut out.
You have to find the uncropped version.
Find the uncropped version.
And this book is available through Amazon.com.
Yes, it is.
And Pat, your dad, this is a book called When Magoo Flew. It's about the UPA animation studio and all the work that they did. I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, have you ever considered writing a history yourself of your dad's career and life? You being, of course, an entertainment journalist and historian yourself. Has it ever been discussed?
Not really, but the more we talk about it, the more I get interested in the idea, just because he had such an odd array of things he was involved with, and areas he touched on, from being involved in the Tammy show and the Big TNT show, which were the first major rock festivals that were filmed, with just an amazing array of acts. And then distributing a movie of a Timothy Leary lecture about LSD, and then all the animation, which is has come to be respected, I think, more and more as the years go on. When he first bought the studio, I think this book that you're showing, When Magoo Flew, it tells the story of how he bought the studio and everyone thought he was going to kind of ruin the properties because they had been these theatrical shorts that won Oscars, and he put them on television. But really, that was what you needed to do at that time, was put things on television. And some of the things he made for television, I think, came out very well too. At the time, it was thought of kind of as a step down, to go from theaters into television. But I think as time goes on, all of the animation that the studio made, but became very respected and very influential. It looks flat to us. It's not the 3D CGI kind of thing that we see now. It's very flat looking, but that also has a real mid-century character to it that proved to be very influential artistically.
Well, I want to thank you both for sharing all these stories. And in closing, I wanted to just reflect on each man's legacy with a little bit of an eye toward the Godzilla history because of the context we're viewing this through. But Allyson, I don't know, how would your dad view this now? He's specifically within this genre, he's a cult film star. And this genre having, become kind of it has a fairly significant cult following. If he were here today, I'm sure he'd be guesting at all of these fan conventions in the United States and all over the world, and really, basking in the appreciation that he didn't necessarily get for this when he was here.
Oh, he would love it. He would be at every convention, signing autographs, promoting it. He would love it. Definitely. I remember he referred to Kumi as the Japanese version of Lee Remick. Was always very generous of giving credit to his other performers and would always speak very highly of him. And I remember he's trying to make the American audience understand, Kumi, and he said, well, she would be about the equivalent of Lee Remick. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. And Pat, your dad actually was involved for the better part of a decade or more trying to get an American Godzilla movie produced in Hollywood. I know he was trying to do something along those lines in the 80s, and he was involved with the first project that was at Sony. It came out through TriStar in 1998. And in fact, he was working on that during the latter part of his career. I don't know if he'd be able to contain himself if he saw what was going on today, because the popularity of the Godzilla franchise today is largely built on the foundation that he built.
I think it is, and I think he would have loved the latest Godzilla versus King Kong because it's a real throwback in some ways to some of the original films, and he also would have loved the idea of digital distribution because it would have meant one more place he could sell his rights to, and he was always waiting for someone to invent a new technology like DVDs or Blu-rays so that he could sell the rights all over again. So he would have been so excited about Netflix or something like that. But yeah, I think he would have been excited about the fact that people are still watching Godzilla movies, still remembering them. And that was one of the very last things we got to do with him was screen the 1998 movie at his home right before he passed away.
Oh, that's neat.
So for people out there in the audience, do you want to give us any information about where people can follow your work, Allyson?
AllysonAdams.com. I did recently become the owner of the oldest photo studio in the country. It's called Montana Picture Gallery. So I'm now taking old Western photos and I'm costume designing, and I live in an old Western town. So I've definitely carried on my dad's tradition of Westerns. I love them. And so now all the movies are coming up here to make Westerns. So now I'm wardrobing all the people.
Oh, wonderful.
So that's kind of what I'm up to these days. I just bought the business. So if you come to Virginia City, Montana, look me up.
And Pat?
That's wonderful. And I'm on Twitter at variety_Pat S. And I'm writing about all kinds of things these days, but a lot of historical content, a lot of articles about, different stars through history and that kind of thing.
Oh, cool.
Great. Well, thank you both again for all the wonderful stories. And thank you, everybody out there, for watching.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Take care.